Hi everybody, I'm Brian Ballrick with Roland Digital Group, and today we're going to cover the basics of perf cut. Perf cut is an option in our software that is super useful. It eliminates that tedious need to hand cut your items out of the material when you're done. This actually eliminates that hand trimming, lets the machine do it automated. You can actually program perf cut to use cut lines that not only pierce the surface, but all the way through the material, leaving enough of it behind so it stays integral to the sheet, but yet pops out with a little force when you're done, and boom, it's in the shape you need, ready to deliver. So again, super useful feature. Let's take a look at how it works. One of the most important aspects of perf cut is going to be the cutting blade assembly. So this comes with our printer cutters. As you can see from the factory, it's set up like this. This is the blade that comes with it. This is a 45-degree blade for general cutting. Great for lots of varieties of material, typically just piercing the surface layer, leaving the underside layer, the carrier sheet. Has a little plunger in the back. So from the factory, it's completely compressed shut. You just push this plunger and there's your blade. We're actually going to remove the 45-degree blade that came with your printer. And we've got here, this is the blades that I use, which are the Japanese type, model number U3050. This is a 60-degree knife. Again, the original was 45. So this is a much sharper angled blade. It's made for cutting denser materials, thicker materials. So I'm very carefully, without hitting that tip, I'm going to take it, I'm just going to insert it into the blade holder just like that. There are magnets down at the base that hold it in place. And again, you can use the plunger, make sure it's fully inserted. But here's the trick. You may not have noticed, but this is a knurled cap. The cap, if you just hold the top and the other knurled section at the other end, we're going to unscrew the cap. And you'll see that as I do that, we're covering up the shaft of the blade quite a bit. And now I literally have very little blade showing through the top, right at the very tip. The trick is going to be we need to expose just enough of the blade so that it will make its way through both layers of the material, all right? We will figure out what that pressure is later, but the important aspect is getting that right amount of the blade exposed. So another key aspect for setting up on perf cut is getting the printer settings for the pressure, speeds, and blade angle. So let's take a look at that now. Here I am at the main screen of the VG3. I'm going to go to blade adjustment, which is right here in the center. Once we're on this page, variety of settings here, you'll see the third one down is blade force. So right out of the gate, when you're running a normal shop doing cut vinyl, you're probably running around a blade force of about 80. And that mates pretty well with the 45-degree knife that came with the machine. If you remember, we're talking about changing that blade out for the 60-degree knife, which gives us a better ability for thicker, and doing perf cut becomes a lot easier. So, first thing I want to do is I'm going to go to blade offset. You notice I just basically scrolled up and down until I see blade offset. And that is the default blade offset from the factory for the 45-degree knife. So that setting is 0.250 millimeters. So I'm going to kick that up all the way to 0.5 and hit save. So that is the correct setting for the 60-degree knife and perf cut for what we're doing. Now, another important note here, we got cutting speed and we have the rise movement speed. So I'll just explain. The cutting speed is just simply when the blade is down, how quickly it's moving for the, to the next point. The rise movement is when it's been pulled up off the material and is going to the next point to start cutting again. And you can change the speed values for those. Fortunately, I'm able to keep it at the max, which is 30 centimeters a second for this material here. You may need to slow it down depending on how tough the material is and it gets bogged down. So you can play with those speeds as well. But the blade offset is fixed. That's specifically 0.500 millimeters for the 60-degree knife. So that's been put in. Let's talk about the blade force. So like I said, normal materials, you're just piercing that surface layer of the vinyl. That's around 80-gram force for the 45-degree knife. Now, 60-degree knife and doing perf cut, this is where it gets tricky. And this is the critical part. getting that pressure just right so it pierces the material. You don't want to go over it, because honestly, if you do that, that tip of the knife is just going to start digging a little too deep, and it starts impacting the protection strip underneath and begins to start cutting that. And it'll do that eventually anyhow. It's a used part, or it's a consumable part. You'll be replacing that when it needs it, but you don't want to prematurely wear it out. So my recommendation is play with these cut settings. Get that pressure just right to where it's just cutting through the entire material. And that's it. So I've checked this material. Like I said, 80 gram force, that's normal for a 45-degree knife, but for this 60-degree knife to get through this entire 6 mil material, front to back, I already checked, and we need to pop this all the way up to 230 gram force. Right about there, and hit save. So we got 230 gram force set here, and a blade offset of 0.500, which is correct for the 60-degree knife. For this material, we're good to go. So the next most important aspect is going to be testing the cut pressures. Remember, we're going to not only pierce the surface, which is our normal operation, but we want to get through the entirety of the material, front and back. So let's test those pressures. First one is to get through the surface with this 60-degree knife. So let's say I'm going to start with a 30 gram force. Since this is a sharper knife, we might make it through. So let's go ahead and execute a test cut. So it's basically a circle with a square in the center. So I'm going to come in here with my pick tool, and if you can see, I'm peeling, but it's not releasing from the surface. So I'm going to say that's too light. So I'm going to take it up to 50 and execute. Come back out here and do a little pick here at the edge, and there it goes. So we are now peeling that circle away. And you notice that I'm able to leave that square in the center. Oh, unless it picks up. Picked up right at the end, but that's okay. But next thing I want to do is I'm actually going to kind of push the material a little bit, and I actually want to see if I can see the knife indentation on the base material. And sure enough, I can actually see that the tip definitely touched that surface of silicone paper and left a mark. That's a really good sign. So that means the pressure is pretty much dialed at 55 gram force. So that's the cut we need to get through the material. Let's check and see what we need to get through everything, front and back of the material. So I'm going to go ahead and bring this back out, cover the media flange over the material, and we're going to go. And I've checked this material before. I think it's about 230 gram force. So I'll put that in, save, and I will execute another test. And notice right away, that's a good thing. So this wasn't able to even to stay in. So that made it all the way through the material. So I've got the amount of blades set just right, and I've got the cut force at 230 gram force, and that makes it all the way through. Now we know both values, right around 50 for the surface and 230 for the entirety of the material. So let's verify our settings in the software, and we should be good to go. So after you've taken care of the mechanical setup at the printer end, the next step is to go into the VersaWorks software and check that all the settings are working for PerfCut at this point. So let's take a look at the software and get those all squared away. Now that we've got the machine settings all correct for PerfCut, we're going to move to the VersaWorks software and make sure that we have the settings here correct. So if you see, I'm in VersaWorks. We're going to go to the job I'm working with today, and I'm going to double click that. This will bring us into the settings window. And I'm going to zoom up on this design real quick. And if you take a look here at the top left, we've got layout, and at about midway down on the left is cut controls. And that's where we're going to spend some time looking at settings. So this job, first thing at the top here is print and cut. That's correct. And we have cutting conditions selected. All of these values are bound to this moving red line that you see, and that is the cut contour line. So very simply, in the design software, I'm going to bounce over to Illustrator, and if I go ahead and select that line, sure enough, if you look up here in color, you see it says cut contour, all one word, 2 capital C's. And in the spot color designation, you'll see it right there. Double click, there it is again, cut contour is defined as a spot color. With those values set, when you go into the VersaWorks software, you will see that it is a moving red line. That's what you want to see. That for sure tells you that this is a cut contour, ready to cut just the top portion, as you can see here, as a label, okay? Second part is this outer boundary line, which if I select and go over to here, is the perf cut contour control. So this outer boundary line, if we go into design software and click on this, you'll see, sure enough, perf cut contour was designated. And in the spot colors, I'm going to float. It's that one right there. Double click. Perf cut contour, all one word, capital P, capital C, and it's designated as spot color. So that is the reserved color that we use for the perf cut. So going into VersaWorks, you'll see that moving gray line. So let's talk a little bit about those. So as you know, when we tested the material, it took about 50 gram force, and that's just to get through the surface, and that's perfect for the cut contour portion. But down here, for that gray line, which we want to cut through, the force is set to 220. So that is correct for this holographic material. Then this value that we start with here, perforation length, about a 1 inch apart, and that is the perforation length. We already know the force is correct to get through, and then the half cut length, about 0.1 inch long. It's just a tiny chad of material left behind, and the way we achieve that is setting a value of 0.1, very small amount, very small distance to create that little open area, and then the half cut force, which is barely enough pressure to touch the material and leave that little piece of material behind. So that when you're done, it's still held together as it's being cut and moved around, but when you're done, it can be pulled out just like this. Here's the holographic material we've been talking about today. You can see actually that I've got the one layer is just cut. So this is the peel a stick label that the client, let's say, wants to have. But the finished product, you can see, is still integral to the original sheet. Yet, when I pull a little bit, you can see that we're actually removing it from the material. Cut, and go all the way around. Just like that. And you end up with a complete decal sheet. So again, we use the regular cut contour spot color to do a simple cut through just the surface, and perf cut contour was defined around the edge, and that's the cut line that we use to designate for punching through and then leaving slight little tabs of the material so that it holds it together until you're ready to pop it out. Thanks very much for watching today. This has been the basics of perf cut. I hope you agree it's something very useful and you can use it in your shop on a regular basis. Look forward to seeing you in another video, and until then, see you then.